What's up, everyone, and welcome back to First and 15 Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Dr. Carlos Reyes, and I'm your go-to injury expert. And in this segment, in this video, we're going to actually get into the injury outlook, the injury history or previous injury, and or what are the fantasy implications for one of the young dynamic quarterbacks in the NFL that came onto the scene last year, someone that you probably are considering for this upcoming draft, whether it's best ball, redraft, superflex, and or concerned about specifically. And that young dynamic quarterback is Anthony Richardson. You know, he did come onto the scene last year. There was very high expectations of him. We expected high value coming out of him here, and he had a lot of talent, you know, a lot of prospect and potential for him to be, Konami code, and specifically in your fantasy football draft, specifically. But if you did take him early in your drafts last year, you're kind of pretty disappointed on what happened. You felt bad for the guy, obviously suffering a season-ending injury. But that's kind of what concerned last year. Just kind of looking at his previous injury history, specifically, in the NFL 2023 season against the Tennessee Titans in Week 5, early October, he suffered a pretty big hit, specifically, and then experienced what we call a grade 3 AC joint sprain. And when you have an AC joint sprain of a grade 3 result, that means that you actually tore ligaments that connect your scapula or shoulder blade to your collarbone specifically. That is the tearing of the AC joint and then the tearing of the cervicoclavicular ligaments. Those are kind of one of two places that actually connect your shoulder blade to the collarbone itself. And when that happens, you're going to have an unstable collarbone. And so considering his healthy outlook for the rest of his NFL season, the Colts were going to take, a big risk with that. They were just shutting him down, season-ending injury, and then also season-ending surgery. So late in October, he actually had surgery in that AC joint region to repair it or reconstruct it. So they reconstruct some of the ligaments that specifically attach that coracoid process to the collarbone to bring stability back down to the collarbone itself. Now, when you're throwing, when you're sprinting, that collarbone moves up and down specifically. And so it's going to move every single time that he's throwing. And he's a right-handed player. That's happening on his right side. And so every time that he raises it up, that thing's going to move. And so why risk him further injuring it? It probably moved upon during the actual incident itself or the actual injury. The clavicle moved in a specific area that they were just like, you know what, shut him down. Let's go through the surgery. That surgery in itself, is going to go through a full rehabilitation process. It's progressive over time, but you're looking at a 4 to 6 month recovery. When we're looking at the news and reports and updates of the Colts camp, they're saying that he actually has a really good rehabilitation progress so far. He was able to get back to throwing in February already. Now, he wasn't throwing, fully. He wasn't going all full velocity, but he was actually just kind of getting back to throwing mechanics specifically. And in OTAs, he was able to start to throw, or at least training, at least in the off-season training, he was able to start throwing specifically. And there are videos of him actually beginning to throw, and you can see some of these. He's actually, going through a full handoff. He's sprinting on the other side. So he's moving that right shoulder specifically. Looks really good. And then he's actually going to a 90 degree position, external rotation, internal rotation, and throws. And you can see the mechanics of his body and his shoulder blade, his collarbone are probably moving all together in a really good congruent nature, at least solid. And he's making some really good throws. He's throwing, he's throwing short, he's throwing intermediary, and he's throwing in deep throws as well during training camp. Now, when they were looking at the news and notes kind of towards the end of training camp, they did kind of shut him down, bring him back because he did have some soreness in there. But that's to be expected, specifically when you have a significant injury like that. He's going to go through the soreness as he starts to acclimate to some of the velocities and the forces that are happening upon that shoulder. But as long as they continue to mitigate some of those forces, mitigate how much load is being happened on there, it's just like a pitch count. You just go and improve and improve and improve, and you utilize your progression based on how sore he is. If he's very sore for 1 day to 2 days, you're probably going to bring him back down. If he's only sore but it improves over a warm up, then you're probably going to keep him there. If there's no soreness there and he keeps throwing, well, then you just kind of progress accordingly, specifically. So those kind of the soreness throws and soreness rules as we go through something like that. But the strength conditioning staff has been working really well with him. His preseason performance looks really good, or at least the potential for his preseason performance looks really good, and the outlook's really good. Just kind of depending on where he's at in this stage of the off season. The key thing would just be looking at obviously once training camp hits, once practice hits. And then goes into the preseason and so on and so forth. Just make sure that you continue to look out for that. Now let's kind of look into the fantasy implications for Anthony Richardson himself. If he can stay healthy, he's got the greatest potential. He's got a really good, we call it dynamic threat dual capability. He's a very good rusher, dynamic rusher, and he's a very good passer. And so with those capabilities, he's got very rich high upside. And so I would consider him a high upside, high risk, high reward, right? And you have to be very real with that, right? Be honest with yourself. If you're taking him in the first round, well, you better have what we call a backup plan. That backup plan should have a really good backup quarterback, considering that you're taking him high of a value specifically. When you're looking at the average draft positions right now, in best ball superflex leagues and some of the ones that I'm doing right now, Anthony Richardson going like late first round, early second round. He's like the 6th or 7th quarterback taken off the boards. That is high. That's high risk, right? And so when you coming back specifically in a superflex league, you better have a QB2 and a QB3 that can just step right up, maybe not replace Anthony Richardson, right? But you better have that option available to you, considering his high risk, specifically because he's a running quarterback. There's an inherent risk for that. And considering where he already got injured earlier and perhaps his potential to get injury and the injury risk is higher, you need to have that backup plan, right? His injury risk is high, right? But they're doing everything they can to make sure that they mitigate some of that risk. But you cannot take away the inherent risk, the inherent high risk capability, capacity for him being a dynamic player like that, especially in the NFL itself. But Anthony Richardson is what I call a high risk, high reward option for all fantasy football managers. You have to understand that if he stays healthy, he could be a game changer for your fantasy football team. But if he stays healthy, so be ready for that, right? Specifically. But in summary, Anthony Richardson, injury history is something to be mindful, right? But his current health status and where he's at in his progression makes it potential to be a fascinating fantasy football starter for your fantasy football team, considering how dynamic and how much more potential he has for this upcoming season. With the right draft strategy and specifically a solid backup plan, he could be a cornerstone and key piece to your fantasy football team moving forward for the 2024 fantasy football season. I'm actually really excited to see him. I think it's super dynamic. You can follow plays where, you pick him up with that high upside, pick him up with that high risk, and then use a backup plan, or try and get him a little later. But considering where he's going right now, he's flying off the boards early. So be ready for that as well. But thanks for tuning in to the First and 15 Fantasy Football Podcast. Make sure that you hit the like, subscribe, and hit that bell so that you continue to get updates specifically on some of these key players moving into the 2024 NFL Fantasy Football season. But as always, leave your questions and comments. We'll try and get back to you as soon as possible. Good luck with your drafts, and we have a season with injury-free and happy drafting.